Telling more and better stories in your thought leadership book in 2026 and beyond is paramount if you want your book and your point of view to stand out from other books and other AI generated books in your space. Today's thought leadership books aren't simply about sharing knowledge. Knowledge is easily accessible now with a quick Google search or Gemini prompt. If you're writing a thought leadership book today, you are the differentiator. Your book should be about sharing you, sharing your thoughts, your expertise, your experiences, your stories. Problem is, people don't always know how to tell a good story, especially in a written form in a book. Now, I've been having an uptick in editorial projects over the last few months, and often I can tell where AI has been used. A lot of times, my authors think that they are sharing a story, and really, they're kind of giving me a glorified summary that doesn't spark imagination, emotion, or most importantly, transformation. And in order to have a book that makes an impact, grows your personal brand, or grows your business brand, and becomes the foundation of future opportunities and multiple streams of income for you, then the stories that you tell in your book must do these three things: make a connection, transfer an emotion, and influence a decision. So, how exactly are you supposed to do all of that? Great question. Strap in, my friend, because you're about to get a mini masterclass on storytelling in this video. I am going to walk you through a real life example from a manuscript I recently reviewed. I'll share why it's not working as an effective story and the exact steps I would take to fix it. When you're done with this video, you will know exactly how to write compelling stories in your thought leadership book so that your readers know you, like you, trust you, and are ready to buy whatever idea, products, or services you have to offer. I'm Denise Renee, your business book bestie. Here is my signature book, and these are some of my clients. I help professionals write books that make their business, career, or thought leadership brand visible. Hey, this is with Besties. So I've gone ahead and put timestamps down below to help you navigate. It makes best sense to watch all the way through for full context, but I understand if you want to jump around. Now, if you want to see more of my videos that talk about writing and self-publishing thought leadership books show up in your suggested feed, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss any of my uploads. And write your book writing questions down in the comments below because I do respond. All right. So before I dive into the writing sample for today and showing you how to fix it, I want to make sure that you understand the basics of how to tell transformational stories in your thought leadership book so that it encourages your reader off the pages of your book and into your business by buying your products and services. So I started off by saying that every transformational story must do three things: make a connection, transfer an emotion, and influence a decision. In this video here, I talk about that and the 5 C's, which are critical to every great transformational story. Those 5 C's are characters, care, context, challenge, and conclusion. And in this video here, I share my 4 sentence story framework, which you can use to generate an effective basis for a transformational story. And you do this by answering 4 key questions. Who is the main character? What's the main character's challenge and why does it matter? What's the catalyst for change? And what are the results or the conclusion? You'll notice that the 4 sentence framework is very closely interwoven with the 5 C's of every good transformational story. So, since I've already spent the time to break these concepts down in the previous videos, I won't dive any deeper into them here. Of course, I'll leave those videos linked for you down below so that you can watch them after you finish this masterclass. So, quick and dirty foundational principles out of the way, let me talk a little bit about using the 4 sentence storytelling framework. If you just follow the framework and write your 4 to 8 sentences, if you're really good, you might actually have a really good story in that nutshell? Well, for the most part, it's going to generate a summary that hits on all of the important elements needed for a transformational story. So it is just a framework, it's just a guideline. While it gives you all of the necessary elements, it doesn't necessarily give you any style or finesse or way with the words so that it becomes a bit more engaging. That's what we're going to handle in this video. But still, it's important to have that basic framework because from that framework, you can create stories of any length that have the requisite emotional depth and transformational experience embedded in them that's required for making thought leadership books an effective brand building vehicle for you. So let's get into how most new authors tell stories. So, if you are writing a thought leadership book for the first time and you are not used to storytelling, you've never taken a fiction writing class or anything like that, or do not feel bad if you find yourself winding up in this category. Please understand that writing is a skill, and it's a skill that I have literally been obsessed with, have loved, and have been working on since I was 8 years old. So there is a facility that I have because now I'm 52. So I have a lot of years of experience. So if this is something you're just coming to for the first time, do not feel bad. But my job here is to help shorten your learning curve and to help you get better faster and to give you tools, tips, and strategies you can put into practice immediately as soon as you stop watching this video. So if you find yourself in this example, don't worry. I've got you. And just remember, you are not alone. So many other first time thought leadership book authors make this similar mistake. So, as promised, I have an excerpt from one of my clients' manuscripts that I reviewed. Now, I do have their permission to share this excerpt for the purpose of not only giving them feedback, but giving you feedback and creating a teachable moment for all of us. So, this example is just one small segment from the beginning of their book. For all my professional life, I was the underdog on most success scoreboards. I was well aware that many of the people I worked with and for did not believe in me, and some didn't even value me as a person. Candidly, I knew that I was done feeling like I wasn't good enough or trying to convince them of my value. My why for real estate investing had to do with being able to escape the toxic work environment in exchange for doing more of what I loved with the people who loved and valued me the most. I also wanted to leave a legacy for my family's next generation. I wanted all of those things, and I didn't want to wait until I was 65 to get started. I wanted to live my life right now. So, before I get into a critical analysis of this example, I want to first say that I 100% empathize with and acknowledge the experiences that this author went through. So, in no ways am I minimizing or diminishing their experience. What I'm critiquing or commenting on are the words that are on the page that they chose to use to represent their experience, not the experience itself. Because here is the reality. While I had an opportunity to sit and talk with this author and understand more of what's behind these words, their readers are not going to have that opportunity. Your readers only have the words that you have left for them on the page. And those words have to do all the heavy lifting for you. And if they're not able to hold their weight, your book will not have the impact it needs to have. Okay. So, that being said, I think that what my author wrote here is a nice little summary, but it doesn't quite do what it needs to do. All right. Do you remember my definition for the three critical elements every transformational story needs to have? Make a connection, transfer an emotion, and influence a decision. So be honest. Did you feel emotionally connected to the words that I read? Did the words that I read inspire you to want to investigate or get into real estate investing, which is the goal of the author's book? They're looking to inspire other people with their story and share their experience and their tactics of how they got started. Does this inspire you? Probably not, because you didn't get much of an emotional connection. You heard about their experiences a little bit, but you weren't able to really, kind of relate. And I gather that if you're able to relate and see yourself in their story, you might start considering something that you may not have even considered before. You're like, maybe I should think about that. Right? So let's get into what's not working with the words that my author left on the page for us and get into fixing them. So here's why this little excerpt is not an effective transformational story. Like I said, on the surface, it sounds like the author is telling their story, but all they've done is given us a summary. It feels like commentary or like a meta conversation in their head. It's not actual story. It's not actual experience. It's a very smoothed over, very glossed over retelling that isn't emotionally satisfying. And then it's not really engaging either. We don't get to see specific events happening. We are missing a whole lot of context. And so we don't really care. We never get a chance to make an emotional connection. The author's summary shares what they felt and thought, but it doesn't offer us, the reader, the opportunity to experience what they went through. We don't get to see for ourselves how the author came to this conclusion, or better still, we don't get to come to that conclusion ourselves. We don't have an emotional response here because we were not invited into the author's experience. And this just simply doesn't take the reader on an emotional or transformational journey. Now, the journey that you take your readers on, it doesn't have to be war and peace long, okay? It doesn't have to be this thick. It could be just as quick and just as succinct, but still way more impactful than what we have going on right now. Right now, this story exists just in the author's head, and it's what I call a head story. Now, what pray tell is a head story? Baby, grab your cup because you finna get a story from me on how I learned what a head story is. Child, let me get comfortable, honey. Okay. So I have my little notes here because there are certain beats that I want to make sure that I cover in this story. And I just had to get comfortable, honey. I had to get comfortable. All right. So way back in the day, honey, in the last century, baby, I was just a wee little lass who grew up in the Bronx, New York, child of Caribbean immigrant parents and product of an immigrant community. I earned my way into a private, elite New England little Ivy League college called Bates College in Lewiston, Maine. And ultimately, I earned my bachelor's in both English and music. And I entered college knowing that I was going to major in English. And I knew that some way, shape, or form, I was going to have a career as a writer. And I was initially really interested in going into publishing, but that's neither here nor there. Suffice it to say that I knew what I wanted going in. So in my freshman year, honey, I locked horns with the head of the English department. She is this short, and let me say I'm saying short, and it's no disrespect because literally we were head to head, eye to eye, and I'm 5'3 3/4" on a good day. Okay, so everybody's taller than me. Basically, if you're shorter than me, you're a child, probably. Okay, most adults are tall are my height and taller. So she's a short, strong-willed, white liberal woman, honey. Because in 1991, there really weren't that many heads of departments at a school like Bates. But there she was doing her thing, and here I come finna do my thing. So you gotta understand, I had mapped out my entire 4 years worth of courses based on the book of courses that we got. So they would give you at the beginning of the year the whole like all of the departments and all of the classes for the requirements for each of the majors. So I sat down with that thing, honey, and I mapped out all the courses that I was going to take for the next 4 years. You got to understand, since seventh grade, eighth grade, I have just breezed through all of my English classes. I was in every honors English class I could be in high school and was even in AP English. Now, although I didn't do fantastically on the AP test because I've just never been like a great standardized test taker, I realized that basically AP classes and courses and whatnot are a scam. It was good for getting me into college. It looked good on the transcript, but when you actually get to college, you might skip a course, but maybe you'll skip like the 100 level courses, but you still have the same amount of requisites to take. So I was just like AP was like a stressful scam that just didn't need to happen. But anywho, I took a couple of 100 level courses immediately in my first semester and basically passed without even breaking a sweat. And so now I was gunning for my 200 level classes in the second semester of my freshman year. And because I was a freshman, I needed to go petition the professor and ask them to let me in their class, and I needed their signature. So I needed Professor Thompson's signature. And I gotta let you know something about Bates. Bates is one of these really liberal places where all the professors encouraged you to call them by their first name. Professor Thompson was not that one. Okay. She didn't necessarily say you couldn't call her Ann, but I wasn't fit to call her Ann. Okay. I called her Professor Thompson. And still to this day, I call her Professor Thompson. All right. So I had to go to this woman, find her, and ask her permission to get into this class. So I find her, stick out my hand, introduce myself, tell her my intentions for being an English major and all the things I've already done. And I said, hey, I'd like to be in your Beowulf class. Can you please sign off on me coming into this class? And she was like, well, you don't really need to take this class. We're about to redo the whole syllabus. So this class might not even be a requirement. So, you don't have to take it. No, I'm not gonna let you in because you don't really need to take it. Did she just tell me no? Hey, hey. She didn't know who she was dealing with. So I had to let her know. Um, yeah, so I've already like planned to take this course. I don't have another one in its place. I really want to take this course. Please sign your signature. And she was like, well, this is old English. I don't think you're gonna be able to keep up. I was like, baby, I grew up reading Middle English. Okay. I grew up reading the King James Version of the Bible. I think I can handle English that's just a couple hundred years earlier than that. Please sign my paper. Baby, every rebuttal that she had, baby, I had a rebuttal for the rebuttal. She finally realized that she was not going to dissuade me. And I saw this look come over her eyes like, hmm, okay. So she switched up her tactic on me, baby. She was like, okay, I'll let you come into the class since you're so insistent. Thank you. That was my response. But I saw that little gleam in her eye. Homegirl was like, she just knew she was going to get me and she was going to weed me out of the class. She was just like, you'll be begging me to, to release you from the class. No worries. So she went on her way, and honey, I went on my way. And then we get to the class. So at the beginning of the class, things was cool and everything like that. And she made us read out loud. And I was able to hang. Okay. I actually did better. Baby, I ain't gonna lie. I did better than the white boys. Okay. All right. Because, you know, I knew where I was as a Black woman. You just have to show up better than everybody else in these spaces. All right. It is what it is. So she was kind of like, okay, okay. But then came the first paper. Baby, I got a C. I was like, wait, what? We don't the only thing I see are A's when it comes to English. What are we talking about? A C. I was crushed with this C. I mean, my last class that I had taken with my favorite professor, Rob Farnsworth, I I had that class. It was like 8 o'clock in the morning on Friday morning. Baby, I would get up at 3 in the morning, go to Pettigrew Hall, which was where the English department was located, but also the computer lab was also located in Pettigrew Hall. I didn't have a laptop yet. So I would get up at 3 in the morning, go to the computer lab, write my paper, and literally be pulling the page off the printer, hot off the printing press, okay, at 8:01, and I'm running down the hall to my class and turning in my paper hot, okay? And those papers that I didn't really even give that much thought to, I got an A minus in that class. And then I was like, maybe if I had written them the day before, I could have gotten an A plus. Okay, this is what I'm used to. So I'm like, a C. What is this? The The next paper was even worse. I got a D. Okay, and the D did not stand for Denise Renee, and I was crushed. Honey, I had to go run into my favorite teacher, Rob. I was like, Rob, what's going on? Just get me these terrible grades. And he was like, well, you need to go sit with her and figure out, what is it that she's looking for and whatever. And I was like, okay. So, honey, I make an appointment. I go to her office and I sit down with her and have a big old cake of humble pie, honey. A whole entire pie of humble pie. And so I sat with her and asked her, well, what what's wrong with my writing and what can I do to improve? And she, in no uncertain terms, let me know. Okay. She ripped my writing a new one. Mm, 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 mm. I mean, you could have said that her name was Edward Scissorhands. She just sliced and diced my writing to shreds. But then she was like, but this is how you can fix it. This is what you need to do. I'll be honest. I don't remember all that she told me specifically, but I do remember taking her feedback to heart. I reread my papers and I was like, oh, she's right. I saw what she saw. So I said, all right, okay. So the next paper, and we only have 4 papers in this class. So the first one was a C, the second one was a D. I was not doing well here. So the next paper, I really put my thought and effort into that paper. I implemented everything that she said, and I got a B plus. And I was like, oh, well, look at God. And look at me and look at Professor Thompson. And then the next paper after that, I got an A. Which was a good thing because that helped to bring my grade out of the hole, and I got a B minus for the entire class. So after that experience, by the end of the semester, and my writing improved, and I had sufficiently impressed her, and we definitely got to a level of mutual respect. But I was not looking to have that experience again. Child. So about a year and a half later in my junior year, when I start to take my concentration courses for creative writing, guess who's teaching the class that I cannot escape? Lord, Professor Thompson again. Hmm. I said, "All right, Lord." I was kind of upset, and I was like, "Okay, I know her for being, a great academic teacher, and I honestly, 100% credit her for turning my critical thinking and my critical writing and my academic writing around. Everything that I learned from that class, I carried forward throughout my sophomore year and my junior year in my other classes. So what she taught me, it really became ingrained in my now writing style. It's like literally has been carrying me through the last 35 years of my writing. So I just didn't necessarily see her as like someone who was creative and, into creative writing. But she was. So, one of the first stories that I turned in, I got feedback that cut me to the core. Okay. It was like my soul left my body and came back in. What she said in this feedback, and I still remember it to this day. She said, Denise, because at that time I wasn't insistent upon Denise Renee, but she said, Denise, this is a head story of the most turgid kind. That was such a gut punch to my ego because if nothing else, I knew how to write a story. I loved writing stories. It's just what I did. And yet again, I just had to go crying into Rob Farnsworth. I was like, this wasn't there. And he read the story and he was like, you know, I believe in you and I love your writing, but she has a point. And I was like, so yet again, I went and I baked myself some humble pie. I made an appointment. I sat down and learned. I learned. And I think I got a B plus in that class. I don't remember. But I learned fast. I learned really quickly. And ever since then, I have been deathly afraid of head stories of the most turgid kind. And I always remember Professor Ann Thompson for this, for really transforming my critical writing and my creative writing. And that's a real true educator. When you remember the people who pointed the way for you, man, they live on. And now you are becoming the beneficiary of some of her teaching. So now, Paul, I've got a question to ask you. Do you feel like I just gave you a summary of an experience that I have 35 years ago? Or did you feel like you were right there with me, going through some of the same anxieties that I went through? And did you feel like a little sense of triumph when you heard about when I got my B's and my A's in her classes? Hold on to that. So we're back in our normal teaching spot. So, what exactly is a head story? And what in the world did I write that was so turgid that I am deathly afraid of head stories today? Well, the story that I wrote basically was of a character who was of Caribbean descent, not surprise. And she was a successful woman. She was flying home to her native island, but she was heading back into a little bit of a storm, family drama and things like that. And she's just sitting on this plane and just thinking. And we're kind of stuck in her head. We don't really see any action. We don't really get to see her interact with other characters. We don't hear, all we get is just her running stream of consciousness. And that's not a story. We're forced to adapt the author's perspective because that's all we have, but we don't really want to be trapped inside of the author's head. And as readers, we can't decide whether the author is being truthful or not. We can't make our own decisions because we didn't get to see any setting information or expositional information. We didn't get to witness any action or any dialogue. And we don't get to form our own opinions about what the emotional stakes are in the story for the main character. We didn't even really get a chance to see a problem. We just are stuck in the tin can in the air in the main character's head. Not an enjoyable experience. It can be very unsettling, like having a floor that's warped or just constantly moving or that's unstable for the reader. So it becomes easy for a reader to get very lost inside of a head story. You kind of don't know whether you're coming or going. Now, a head story becomes very easy for a writer to write from an omniscient standpoint because the author of the story knows everything that's going on, right? They know what's going on inside of the main character's head, whether it's a fiction story or a nonfiction story, or they know what happened to themselves if they're telling a personal story about something that happened to us. We know what happened, right? We have our experience and our perspective of the events, but in telling a head story, we're not giving the reader an opportunity to see multiple angles or multiple sides of that story. We're just stuck with the author's interpretation, which may or may not be reliable. A lot of times when authors write head stories, especially nonfiction business book authors, you as the person who went through the experience, you know all of the context, you know everything that happened, you know everything that comprises the scene and comprises all of the emotions, but your reader does not. And very often, because you are the person who experienced everything in Technicolor, when you retell it, don't always give us all of the context that we need. So head stories wind up being a very boring experience for the reader. And here's why. Head stories are kind of like taking a delicious meal. Like, okay, this is, if you're a vegan or vegetarian, you might not consider this to be delicious. But the rest of us meat eaters, we might enjoy a full dinner with a nice, well seasoned steak cooked to however you prefer it. Okay, with some nice crunchy broccoli that's seasoned with garlic and herbs, and a nice garlic mashed potato with some parmesan sprinkled on it. And, as I'm telling you all of these different flavors, I'm sure you can imagine eating this meal and just, savoring. It's a very savory type of meal. Now imagine if you took that meal, threw it in a blender, and it became a liquid mush. Not so appetizing, is it? Head stories kind of do the same thing. It's like they take all of the flavor, all the context, all of the nuance, all the everything, and turn it into baby food. Turn it into baby food for the reader, and the reader's not a baby, okay? Readers have teeth. They can chew. They can digest for themselves. They don't need you to pre-digest for them. So, therefore, head stories wind up missing the mark on the three things that a good transformational story needs to do. Head stories do not make a connection. Head stories do not transfer an emotion. And head stories definitely do not influence a decision because head stories are usually devoid of two of the five C's of every good transformational story. It's usually devoid of care and context, especially context. Now, there's a reason why care and context matter to great stories, and especially great transformational stories. I'll give you an example. So, my son attends school virtually. Our county has a program, and so he's been in that program for the last 2 years. Every now and then, we get issues of him falling asleep in a certain class. And so the teacher takes screenshots and sends us a picture of whenever he's falling asleep in class. Now, this is something that his dad and I have been on top of him about. So, a few weeks ago, I get another email from a different teacher of him falling asleep in class, and I was livid. So, as soon as he comes over to my house, I'm like, hey, I got this message from your teacher saying you were asleep in class. Like, what happened? And he was like, well, and I'm like, what you mean? Like, what is that? And I was like, okay, his dad and I, we have got to really nip this behavior in the bud. So a little bit later on, I called dad and I said, hey, did you see that message that we got from the teacher? He goes, yeah, I know. Actually, what happened was he did go to sleep late because the night before he was up way past his bedtime. He was having one of his migraines. And we do know him to suffer from migraines from time to time. And dad said that he was just downstairs laying on the couch next to grandma, and grandma was nursing him or whatever. And so, it did take him a while to like finally get over the migraine and actually get to bed. Context. I'm like, why didn't your son tell me this? If he had told me this, I wouldn't have given attitude. I would have cared. Okay. Knowing though that piece of information would have completely changed how I viewed the situation and how hard I came down on him for that. Context, care, okay? Because a picture of my child sleeping from a teacher is grounds for words, all right? Is grounds for squabbling up, okay? It's not really physically squabbling up. It means that where some electronics is getting taken away, and he basically probably would have preferred that I squabbled up than took away one of his electronics. Anyway, child, you see how context and care matter in this story? Uh-huh. Context colors your perspective and your feelings about a situation. So when you wind up writing a head story, a summary that just glosses over these things, you are handicapping your story. So bringing our attention back to my client's excerpt and how I even got to receiving this manuscript to evaluate in the first place. As I said, my client isn't alone in turning in manuscripts to me to review that have stories that function in this way. I was able to spot this error when I did an editorial assessment for my client. So, to conduct my editorial assessment, my client paid the deposit and sent over their manuscript. I printed it out, gave it a thorough read, identified at least three areas that were working well for the manuscript, and at least three other areas where they could make some improvements. In the case of this particular manuscript, one of the things I recommended was including more stories and improving the quality of the storytelling. I share my thoughts in an MP3 file that my client can listen to, plus, I give written documentation that summarizes all of my findings. I make recommendations for what they should do next and let them know how I can support them through their next steps. So if you have a manuscript that you're working on and you're wondering if you're writing head stories, head on over to writingwithdeniserenee.com/assessment to get your editorial assessment started today. So, for my client, what is the fix? How do we turn this head story into a real transformational story? Now, popular advice that's given to fiction writers is to show, don't tell. And I'll tell you, right now, the way that this excerpt from my client is written, it's definitely doing a lot of telling and not a lot of showing. So I'm going to break down how to show, not tell, when writing stories in your thought leadership book. So using the 5 C's, every good story, the 4 sentence story framework, plus the show, don't tell advice, here is how I would coach my clients into transforming this segment into a real story. So the author starts off by saying, for all of my professional life, I was the underdog. To me, that is a very broad statement. It's also a rather overused statement. So here I would ask my client a coaching question. How can you show us that you were the underdog rather than tell us? So show, don't tell means that anytime you can show us dialogue between two or more characters, where you can share a scene that helps us understand the emotional gravity of the situation. Anytime we can see action, you don't have to tell us that you were angry. You could tell us that you looked around your office and saw the piled papers on your desk and you took your hand and swished and mushed everything off until it all clattered on the floor and went scattering everywhere. Well, you don't have to tell us that you're angry. You just showed us that you were angry or frustrated, right? So, any and every time that you can show us action, show us dialogue, do so. Okay. Serve us a full steak dinner. Don't serve us steak dinner flavored baby food. Okay. So here are some more coaching questions that I would ask my client in order to further help them turn this segment here around. I would say, you mentioned that people didn't value. How can we, as the reader, see that? Perhaps you can create a scene for us. Think back to an instance in your office where there was an exchange, where you received that message loud and clear so that the reader can experience it 2. Now, let me go back a segment or two to the story that I told you about my experience with my professor and how I even got to learning and understanding what a head story was. Now, I could have told you that story as a quick little summary. I mean, I gave you a lot of context, right? But did you not feel like you were kind of there with me? You kind of felt some of my angst. You felt, where I felt my pride was wounded. I'm crying to my favorite professor. I'm eating humble pie in her office, but felt, a sense of triumph when I got my grades back, when I felt like, oh, okay, I understand what she's saying. And all right, let me go work on this. And then I got the grades that I needed to get, right? So you felt like you went through an experience with me, even though I didn't give you like every single little detail. I gave you enough where you saw me go from very prideful, very arrogant, very, you finna let me get in this class, you finna get me my grades, okay? And I got taken down a couple of notches, and then I earned my way back up. That was me demonstrating, giving you an experience. Now, yes, I did that verbally, but that could be translated easily on the paper. In fact, it was on the paper. I just had some bullet points of things that I wanted to hit, but I could have easily written that out in prose form. I shared with you the flow of events the same way that I experienced them so that you could experience them too. I gave you context for my first encounter with Professor Thompson because it really set up the second encounter, the second class. And this is the process that you want to mimic in your writing. Take us through an experience, walk us through a scene, give us dialogue, show us what happened. Don't just summarize and tell us what you think about it now that you've had so much distance from it. And sometimes I think that's a little bit of like a self-protective mechanism where we're like, I've moved beyond this, and this doesn't affect me anymore. So, want to talk about things in a very calm and controlled manner. Baby, I'm still affected by things, from 35 years ago. Okay. That comment Professor Thompson left me, I am still affected by. Okay. I am still affected by that comment to this day. So there's nothing wrong with experiencing your emotions and letting that out when you're writing. That can be a very cathartic experience when you're writing. Let us into those emotions, okay? Don't try to squelch them. Let them know because that is what people relate to. It is your humanity that calls people in to you and helps them to relate to you so that they get to know you, like you, trust you, and ultimately buy anything that you are selling because they buy you. So let me give you an example of showing, not telling in a nonfiction business book. Now, because I'm respecting my client's privacy, I'm not going to give you this example with their writing. I'm going to give you something a little bit similar. So, if I were to kind of like step into this experience that the author is trying to share, I would pick a particular scene that really exemplifies everything that they were going through on their job. Because one thing that they said was that they were in a toxic environment. And a lot of people can relate to being in a toxic work environment. So here's an example of how I might create a scene that readers can really experience something and really sink their emotional teeth into. I'm ready for you. I took a deep sigh, pushed back my chair, and left my office to follow the vice president of the company down the hall, where she was temporarily set up while visiting the Atlanta office for the next few days. At 5'3", not many people are shorter than me. She was even in heels. She waited till I stepped into the office, then closed the door behind me. Power move much, I thought, but I obediently sat down, folded my chocolate hands in my lap, and waited, staring out the window to the King and Queen buildings nearby. She walked behind the desk positioned in front of the window, blocking my view. She took a seat. The chair almost swallowed her up. How's everything going? She flashed me an insincere, toothy grin as she constantly flicked her bluntly cut, shoulder length blonde hair away from her eyes. She looked like she was probably the captain and flyer of her cheerleading squad in high school. She certainly had the nice, nasty attitude most head cheerleaders usually have. Everything's going well, thanks. I knew better than to answer honestly. Frankly, I was racking my brain, trying to imagine what type of feedback she had for me, given that she worked in the Orange County office and my boss, who reported to her, worked from her home in England. So far, it looks like you're doing good work. Everyone says how professional and well spoken you are. And that's definitely what we need since you're the office manager. Well spoken, I thought to myself. What's the alternative? Me grunting like a Neanderthal? But I do have to bring up a few interpersonal incidences because it seems like we're having some issues, she continued. You have this big, vibrant personality. So sometimes people feel intimidated to bring up their concerns directly to you. Big personality? I repeated slowly and calmly. I was genuinely confused. Was she making a not so subtle dig on my weight as a short plus size black woman? People always complimented me on my smile, which I tried to flash as much as I could to keep things lighthearted while in the office, since I was the first person people encountered when they came through the door or called. Was I too chatty and chummy with everybody? There were only 13 of us in this office, and most of them weren't even in every single day like I was. I dressed professionally every day, usually a wrap dress and heels. My short afro was usually styled in neat twists. I spoke in normal tones. It's not like I came to work in apple bottoms, gold door knockers, and double XL acrylics, popping my gum and talking loudly. It was time for me to get out of my head and ask specific questions. You said I was being professional, so what do you mean by a big personality? Also, what incidents are you referring to? And why didn't anyone approach me if they felt they had an issue with something I said or did? Well, no, yes, you are professional, but you just have, well, people don't always feel comfortable approaching you. Who did I make feel uncomfortable and what exactly did I do? I could almost see her wishing the chair truly could swallow her whole. She looked at me sheepishly, like she drew the short straw and was sent to deliver this news to me. But she always prided herself on how hard she worked and barreled through things. Her back stiffened in the chair. I swear I saw her put her big girl panties on before proceeding. Well, when the president was here a few months ago and he had a meeting with everyone, you made a statement in that meeting that made him feel uncomfortable. I blinked fast, not believing what I was hearing. So, if I said something that made him uncomfortable, why didn't he pull me aside and say something the same day? Or he could have set up a meeting for us to talk about it when he got back to California. Actually, he called me about another issue, but he never brought this up to me. He's the president. Why would he be scared to talk to me about anything? And why is this just coming up now? Well, we've just been observing you, and that's just one example. There have been more incidences with other people, and everyone on the executive team is just wondering if you're a really good cultural fit for this company. Oh, I thought to myself. I straightened my back and took a deep breath so that I could stay calm and stifle the angry black woman response that she probably assumed was coming next. I was trying to give her the benefit of the doubt over the last 15 minutes, but I couldn't excuse all the racially charged microaggressive language that permeated the conversation any longer. When she saw me bristle, she tried cleaning up her statement by trying to praise other things that she thought I was doing well, as if she had a perfect view of my daily performance from 3,000 miles away. I tuned her out. Anything she said after that sounded like Charlie Brown's teacher to me. Wah, 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 wah. In that moment, I knew my days in that company were numbered. They were either going to fire me or I was just going to quit. I just didn't know which would happen or when. I tried my best for 2 more years after this meeting to fit the culture. My work was always satisfactory, if not exemplary. So no talk of firing me because of performance ever came up. but being there felt like death by a thousand nitpicky comments. I was never allowed to advance into other roles or responsibilities that could have increased my salary. My last trip to the Orange County office was the nail in the coffin for me. A few months later, I gave my boss 2 weeks' notice without having another job lined up, simply because I could not be there one more second. Okay. That's a little bit of a long scene there, but tell me, how did this reading compare to the first reading that I shared earlier in the video? What did you feel? What did you experience? No, that was not a rewrite of my client's story. I don't know the specific incidences that my client was referring to in that particular segment. So there's no way that I could have rewritten it. And even if I did, I would not have shared that publicly because that would be part of their book. Instead, what this was something that I quickly drafted as a scene from my life. Yes, this actually happened about 10, 11 years or so ago now. I share this because there are some overlaps in my and my clients' experiences. I can completely relate to being in a toxic environment and needing to get out at all costs. So I picked one particular instance that I thought really encapsulated how I felt in that environment and how I felt really nitpicked and attacked and just like the ridiculousness of it all. So I zeroed in on that one particular scene and then I just summarized the next 2 years really quickly to let you know, hey, I got up out of there. But this is an example of what my client can potentially do in their book and what you can do in your book as well. If you are a Black woman or a person of color and you've been in corporate spaces, I don't have to tell you how common conversations like the one I just showed you are. Racially microaggressive environments are toxic for Black women in particular. We often leave corporate America to pursue consulting or freelance work or some other type of business that feeds our souls, simply to have the freedom to choose who we work with, what we decide we're going to tolerate, and determine what we're worth. In me sharing a very detailed narrative about an experience I had, I'm sure even if you're not a Black woman in particular or a person of color, you can relate to being in a toxic work environment. You can relate to having like these subtle jabs and little nitpicky comments that are said to you, and you can probably relate to feeling like an outsider. But if you have a similar color skin to me, then you can also understand the other layers that are embedded in this story. Context. So, my specific recommendation to my author, who so graciously allowed me to share their excerpt here, I would say that when you are writing about specific incidences in your career or in your experiences stepping out into your new venture of real estate investing, share specific incidences that give us a window into that experience and find that piece that most people can generally, universally empathize with or relate to. What's that emotional core that is true for a lot of people, regardless of race, gender, class, or, whatever, what have you. But especially if you know that you are speaking to a very specific audience, make sure that what the scene that you choose to illustrate for us, definitely your core audience can relate to emotionally. Because without your audience being able to emotionally connect and see themselves in you, they're not going to be able to think that they can do what it is that you did. They won't be able to think that they can follow in your footsteps. And to the best of your ability, describe the scene for us while following the 4 sentence story framework. And that framework, remember, gives you the major beats that you need to be hitting in your story so that it is a transformational story and we get to see an entire arc. Even a few sentences can say a lot. So, giving us even just a quick little snapshot is going to help your reader think and reflect back to their own experiences of when something similar happened to them. In the example that I wrote out, you hear me thinking to myself, but you also see me having dialogue with the other person. So it's not just a head story. We're seeing action, we're getting context, we're seeing a little bit of the environment, and even the environment is playing a role in the emotional weight of the scene. The person, I'm looking out the window, but the person blocks my view, and they're making power moves, and they're nice, nasty, and their, tone of voice and flashing an insincere grin and little details like that, context like that helps to give the reader an emotional experience. As much as you can, give us movement. At the beginning of my scene, you saw where we moved from one place to another. You see body language, the flicking of the hair, straightening up of the back and bristling, things like that. The more you can show, not tell, the better. So in the example that I provided, I gave the reader setting, expositional elements, context, dialogue, and action that the reader can follow along and witness for themselves. And I believe I laid out the emotional stakes, including all of these different types of elements, is what's going to help your reader put themselves in your shoes. They will feel all of the indignities that you felt. And that is what making a connection and transferring an emotion is all about. That's allowing your reader to enjoy the full steak dinner instead of a steak dinner smoothie. Now, like I said at the beginning, I've been at writing for well over 40 years. So if the first time that you try to write a scene, it doesn't flow smoothly, that's what editing is for. My recommendation to everyone is when you're writing, you want to have a group of beta readers who are willing to read your work and give you honest feedback. They could be friends, colleagues, family members who are not just going to say, "Oh, you're doing great, baby." You want them to be able to say, "Hey, I like this, but I don't really like that," or "I was confused about this." You need them to give you their honest feedback. And by their feedback, you'll know if your story is making a connection, transferring an emotion, and influencing a decision. And when they are giving you the feedback where they felt everything that you felt, you know that you've hit the nail on the head. You've successfully written a transformational story that resonates with your reader. Now, if I haven't driven this point home yet, let me do so now. This is why emotionally resonant stories matter in your thought leadership book. Because if your story does not move your reader emotionally, if your story does not connect with your reader emotionally, it's not a story. And your reader will never take action with you. They will never buy into you, neither will they buy from you. Emotions are the drivers of transformational stories, and transformational stories drive people to buy. They buy into you as a person, they buy into your ideas. They literally take out their wallets and buy products and services from you. And make no mistake, we make purchases based on emotion and we rationalize them later. If the stories in your thought leadership book are not transformational stories that elicit some type of emotional response from your readers, your book will not make the impact that you are hoping for it to make. Specifically to my client who allowed me to use this excerpt, I would say that when you choose to share a tense moment on your job, like I did, and you link it to one of your reasons why real estate investing was your escape from this rat race, that's going to resonate with your readers. And that's going to help them to think about, well, should real estate investing be the route that I take to escape my particular circumstances? That's what you want them thinking. So, for example, if I were writing your book, but I had my experiences and I was encouraging people to follow in my footsteps of quitting their job and starting a freelance writing business. I don't recommend that, by the way, not without a safety net. But if that's what I was encouraging people to do, I would definitely twist that emotional knife in a little bit more in that scene that I shared. I would actually add in some questions for my reader to think about. I'd say something like, have you ever been in a toxic work environment? Have you ever felt limited at your job knowing that there was no opportunity for you to rise higher or increase your income? Have you ever felt misunderstood or misrepresented at your job? What would you do next? I felt all of these things and I decided I was tired of it and it was time to make a change. I was going to strike out on my own and start my own freelance writing business. And I think you should too. No, I probably wouldn't be that, on the nose with that last part. But you see where I would twist the emotional knife in with my reader by asking them certain open-ended questions that get them to think and get them to really put themselves in that situation. That is what you want. And because you're continuing to share your steps throughout the book of what you did to get started in real estate investing, your readers are going to put themselves in your shoes and kind of try it on for size themselves and see if they could imagine themselves doing what you did and following in your footsteps and helping them to decide if this is something they really want to commit to, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the goal of your book. That's how you get to the influencing a decision part of the three critical things that every transformational story needs to do. So, my broader advice to you watching this video is that the steps to transform your stories in your thought leadership book is to get the story out of your head. Stop writing ahead stories. Think about how can you share this story in a very visceral and emotionally resonant way. What are all the contexts that you can give for us? What dialogue, what actions, what can we see and experience as a reader? What context do we need to understand what we are witnessing and experiencing? Help your reader to see as you saw, to feel as you felt, to hear as you heard, to understand as you understood. Walk us through the experience. And it's okay to tell us a little bit about what you were thinking, like I did in my example. You heard some of the thoughts that were running in my head, but you also saw and experienced something. That is the key. That is how you transform your writing into effective storytelling. So now, if you think that leveling up your storytelling skills is just too much work and you can just use AI to help you write your book, wrong. AI cannot necessarily help you write these transformational stories. You would have to super prompt it to get it to ask you what it needs to ask you to pull these stories out of you and to write it in a way that connects. And to be frank, by the time you figure out the right prompt, you could have just sat down and thought about it and did your own writing any old way. AI makes a great partner for editing, maybe helping you be a little bit more brief, but it cannot generate your stories for you. It just doesn't know you. And to be honest, you might not even want to let AI edit your stories for you because it just might suck all the flavor out of it. Personal, emotional, transformational stories are exactly what's missing from AI written books. I explain in this video here. Click on this video now to watch, and I'll see you on the other side.